"Grandma," she said, "did you love him more than you loved my mom?" She was 9 years old. She was wearing a navy dress that someone, her mother, I would understand only later, my own daughter, had clearly let her pick out for herself because it had a small sequined cat stitched onto the collar that did not belong at a funeral, and was, to my eye, the most beautiful thing in the entire room. She had found me by the coffee urn at the back of the church fellowship hall. This child I had met exactly twice in her whole life, and she had asked me her question in the clear, carrying, completely unembarrassed voice that only a 9-year-old can use. And the 3 or 4 people standing near us went very quiet, and I felt the floor of 8 years drop straight out from under me. I did not have an answer for her. That is the plain truth. I, a woman of 64, who had spent 8 years entirely certain that I was the wronged party in my own family, stood at my own mother's funeral and could not answer a 9-year-old's question, because somewhere in the simple machinery of it, did you love him more than you loved my mom? I heard, for the very first time, the exact shape of the wound I had spent 8 years refusing to look at. My name is Diane. I am 64 years old, and for almost 40 of those years I took in alterations and sewing out of a little room at the front of my house in Natchez, Mississippi. Hems and wedding gowns and prom dresses and the occasional impossible last-minute miracle. The patient work of a woman who is good with her hands and comfortable in her own quiet company. I raised one daughter. Her name is Rachel. And on the day the little girl with the sequined cat asked me her question, I had not spoken to Rachel, my only child, in just over 8 years. The funeral was my mother's. Vivian. She had lived to 91 and died in her sleep, which is the death we all claim to want for the people we love. And her dying had done the one single thing that nothing else in 8 years had managed to do. It had put my daughter back inside a room with me. Rachel had come home for her grandmother's service. She had driven in from 3 states away with her daughter, my granddaughter, Lily, and she had sat on the far side of that fellowship hall, near the door, the way a person sits when she has already planned her exit, and she had not come near me, and I had not known how on earth to cross the distance. And so the two of us had spent the whole service and most of the reception as strangers who happened to share the same dead woman. It was not always like that between us. I want you to know that, because the distance at that funeral was not the distance of two people who had never been close. Rachel and I had been close. Close the way a mother and an only daughter get when the father is not much in the picture, which ours was not. I taught her to sew at this same front room table. She used to call me on her lunch breaks just to narrate the small nothings of her day. When she got married, I took in the waist of her grandmother's wedding gown with my own 2 hands, at 2 in the morning, weeping a little into the satin the way you do. I tell you this so that you understand that what broke between us was not some thin thing that had always been fragile. It was a strong thing. I had 30 years of credit in the bank of my daughter's trust, and I have learned, the hard way, that a strong thing does not break slowly. A strong thing holds, and holds, and holds, right up until the one moment it is asked to bear real weight. And then, if it fails you in that moment, it does not crack. It shatters all at once, and all the credit in the world does not buy it back. Let me tell you the story I had carried into that room. The story I had told myself, and my friends, and my mother, for 8 years. Rachel cut me off, I would say. After her divorce, she decided I hadn't supported her, and she punished me for it by taking my granddaughter and disappearing out of my life. I would say it with a particular tired sigh, the sigh of a reasonable woman wronged by an unreasonable child. The unspoken second half of the sentence, the part I never said out loud but believed all the way down, was this: she cut me off because I told her the truth, and she could not stand to hear it. Rachel was being dramatic. Rachel was being punitive. Rachel had always been sensitive, too sensitive, and she had taken a mother's honest opinion and turned it into a lifelong grievance. And the whole estrangement was, at bottom, a tantrum she was simply too proud to end. That was my story. I had polished it for 8 years until it shone. Now let me tell you what actually happened, because the gap between those two things is the whole of this story. 8 years ago, my daughter left her husband. His name was Paul. And I have to be fair to Paul here, because making him a monster would be its own kind of lie. And I have told enough of those. Paul was not a monster. He was charming and successful. And he had been, for the better part of a decade, the son I never had. He fixed my gutters. He called me on my birthday. He sat in my kitchen and laughed at my stories. I adored him. And when Rachel came to me in the worst year of her life and told me that the marriage was over, my very first feeling, God forgive me, my very first feeling, before love, before any thought of my own daughter, was a kind of grief for Paul, for losing Paul, for what people would say. I never asked her why. That is the thing I cannot get past now. My daughter came to me bleeding from a wound I could not see, and I did not ask her a single real question about it. I did not say, "What happened? Are you all right? What do you need?" I said, and I remember the exact words. They have been sitting in me like a stone for 8 years. I said, "Rachel, are you sure you're not just throwing away a good man over nothing? A good man. Over nothing." To my own child, who had come to me for shelter, in the doorway of the only home she had ever been sure of. And then I did worse than say it. I lived it. Over the months that followed, as my daughter went through the loneliest and most frightening passage of her life, I stayed close to Paul. I kept inviting him to things. I sent him a card. I let him sit in my kitchen and tell me his side, and I nodded along, because his side was the comfortable side. The side that meant nothing in my own world had to change. I told myself I was just being fair, just keeping the peace, just refusing to take sides. But there is no such thing as not taking sides when your child is drowning and you keep on having coffee with the shore. Refusing to choose her was choosing him. I just could not see it, because I was the one doing it. I think about the card I sent him. That is a small thing, but small things are sometimes where you can see the whole of yourself most clearly. A few months into the separation, Paul had a birthday, and I sat at this kitchen table and I picked out a card, and I wrote something warm inside it, thinking of you, and I mailed it to the man my daughter was divorcing. And it never once occurred to me, not for a single second, that my own daughter had not gotten a card from me that hard month, that I had not thought to send my grieving child so much as a note that said, "I am thinking of you, hold on." I had warmth to spare for the son-in-law. For the daughter, I had only opinions. If you had asked me then, I would have told you with a perfectly straight face that I loved my daughter more than my own life. And I did. I just spent my actual postage on him. Rachel asked me, once, near the end, to just be on her side. Just once. Just to say, out loud, "I am your mother, and I am with you." And I gave her something careful and measured, and even-handed instead. Something about loving them both and not wanting to get in the middle. And I watched something close in my daughter's face, quietly, permanently, like a light going off in a house at the end of a street. Within the year, she had moved away. The calls got shorter, and then they stopped. And I told myself she was being dramatic. So that is the woman who was standing by the coffee urn when a 9-year-old in a navy dress walked up and asked her whether she had loved him more than she had loved her mom. I had been watching Lily across that hall all afternoon, if I am honest. I could not help it. She was the only grandchild I had. And I knew her the way you know a face from photographs you were not supposed to have seen. Rachel had blocked me on everything, but cousins are cousins. And now and then, over 8 years, a picture had reached me sideways, and I had memorized every one of them. So I knew that the solemn little girl in the navy dress by the dessert table was mine. I had not dared go near her. I had spent the whole reception in a quiet agony of wanting to, and not being allowed, sneaking glances, terrified that Rachel would catch me looking. And then, in the strange way that children move through a room with no idea of the invisible walls the adults have so carefully built in it, Lily simply walked straight across one of those walls, right up to the coffee urn, and looked up at me and chose me, of all the grown people in that hall, to ask her enormous question. I want to tell you about the question, because the question did something that 8 years of my own thinking had never once managed to do. Lily did not ask it to wound me. She was 9. She asked it the way children ask the enormous things, plainly, because no one had yet taught her that it was a thing you were not supposed to say. And in her small, clear voice, I heard, suddenly and completely, the household she had been raised in. I heard the version of me that lived in my daughter's house, 3 states away, the version that had been explained to a little girl at some point, gently, by a mother trying to account for why there was no grandmother. I heard that somewhere in that faraway house, the story of me was the story of a woman who had chosen her daughter's husband over her daughter. And the unbearable part, the part that took my knees out from under me by the coffee urn, was this. It was not a lie. The child had it right. My granddaughter, who had met me twice, understood the truest thing about me better than I had let myself understand it in 8 years. I knelt down. My knees are not good, but I knelt down anyway on that fellowship hall floor, to be level with her, and I said the only honest thing I had. I said, "No, sweetheart, no. I loved your mom more than anyone in the whole world. I just did a very bad job of showing it when she needed me to, and I have been sorry about it for a long, long time." And Lily looked at me with the grave, weighing look that children give you when they are deciding whether to believe you, and then she said, "Okay." And she went to find her mother, the way children do, dropping a thing that has shattered an adult and simply walking off toward the snacks. And I stayed down on that floor a moment longer than I needed to, because I did not trust my legs. Something happened to me on that floor that I have never been able to fully describe. 8 years of a story I had built and defended and leaned my entire self against simply gave way, the way a roof gives way under snow it was never built to hold. All at once, I was not the wronged mother anymore. I was just a woman who had been handed, by a 9-year-old in a sequined collar, an accurate report on her own life, and who could no longer pretend she had not received it. I thought about every time I had told that polished story to a friend, every sympathetic sigh I had collected, every dinner where someone had patted my hand and said how hard it must be to have such an unforgiving daughter. I had spent 8 years gathering comfort I had not earned, for a wound I myself had inflicted. And the price of all that comfort had been a granddaughter I did not know, and a daughter who had learned, at the single most important moment of her life, that her own mother could not be relied upon to choose her. I found Rachel by the doors. She had seen the whole thing. She had been watching her daughter, the way you watch your child in a room full of people you do not trust. And she had seen Lily walk up to me, and she had seen me kneel, and her face when I came toward her was braced and hard and ready for a fight, ready for me to scold her for what her child had said, ready for the woman I had been for 8 years. I did not give her that woman. I think it is the only thing I did right in this entire story, and I only managed it because Lily had knocked the wind out of every defense I had. I did not explain myself. I did not say it was complicated, or that I had loved them both, or any of the even-handed nothing I had hidden behind for a decade. I looked at my daughter and I said, "I chose wrong. When you needed me to stand beside you, I stood next to him instead, and I called it fairness, and it was not fairness, it was cowardice, and it was the worst thing I have ever done. You were not being dramatic. You were right to go. I am so sorry, Rachel. I am 8 years too late, and I am so sorry." My daughter did not fall into my arms. I want to be honest about that, because the honest version is the only one worth anything to you. There was no music, no movie embrace over the funeral cold cuts. What there was my daughter looking at me for a long, long moment with 8 years in her eyes, and then saying, very quietly, in a voice that shook, "That's the first time you've ever said that." And then she said she had to take Lily home, and she did. But before she left, at the door, she stopped, and she said, "You can call me." And it was not forgiveness. It was something smaller and harder, and far more real than forgiveness. It was a door, left open the width of a hand. I called. Of course I called. I called the next week, and the call was awkward and stiff, and I was terrified the whole time of saying the wrong thing. And I have called nearly every week since, and slowly, over this past year, the calls have gotten less stiff. We are not healed. I do not use that word because Rachel does not use it, and she has earned the right to set the terms. What we are is in contact. What we are is a mother and a daughter doing the slow, unglamorous, entirely uncinematic work of finding out whether trust can be rebuilt from the studs up, 8 years after it burned down, and whether a woman my age can learn, this late, to be the kind of mother she should have been when it actually counted. The work of it is humbling in a way I was not at all prepared for. I had imagined, across the 8 years of my polished story, that if Rachel ever came back, it would be because she had finally seen reason, that she would return to me. It has been the exact opposite. I am the one who has had to come back, and not in a single grand gesture, but in 100 small, unglamorous ones. A phone call that I make sure not to let run too long, a birthday remembered correctly, a question asked and then actually listened to, an opinion swallowed when nobody asked for it. I am learning, at 64, to be a guest in my daughter's life instead of an authority over it, and to be grateful for the guest's chair, and to understand that I am sitting in it only because she is generous enough to offer it, and not because I am owed it. That is its own kind of school, and I am a slow student in it. But I am enrolled, and that is a great deal more than I was for 8 years. I have learned some things about that year I never knew, because I am finally asking the questions I should have asked at the start. I have learned what Paul was, underneath the gutters and the birthday calls. And no, I am not going to lay it out for you, because it is Rachel's, and I spent 8 years failing to protect her privacy, and I am not going to start failing again now. But I will tell you that when I finally heard it, when I finally sat still and listened to the thing my daughter had been trying to tell me in my kitchen 8 years before, I understood that the good man I had grieved losing had never really existed, and that my daughter had not thrown anything away. She had escaped, and her own mother had stood in the driveway, waving cheerfully at the man she was escaping from. Lily and I are building something too, carefully, on her mother's terms, at her mother's pace. She is 10 now. She still has that navy dress, though it does not fit anymore. Rachel told me she will not let it be given away. And I think about that dress, and the small sequined cat on the collar, and the question that came out of that child in that hall, and I understand that my granddaughter did me the greatest kindness anyone has ever done me. She asked the question out loud that every adult in my life had been too polite to ask. And the question saved what was left of my family, because it would not let me keep hiding from the answer. If there is someone in your life you have been estranged from for years, and you have a clean, comfortable story about whose fault it is, a story you have polished until it shines, then this one is for you. One word in the comments, if it found you. Beside. Just that. It is for the person you did not stand beside when it counted. And it is also, please hear me, a reminder that a great many of those people are still alive, still reachable, still on the other side of a door that might open the width of a hand, if you are willing to stop defending your story and finally tell the truth. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one, before I go. The first, there is a terrible difference between being right and being there. And when someone you love is in the worst season of their life, they will not remember which one of you had the better opinion. I was so concerned 8 years ago with being fair, with being reasonable, with not taking sides. And all my daughter needed, the only thing she needed, was for her mother to walk across the room and stand next to her. Being even-handed is a fine thing in a courtroom. In a family, when your child is drowning, even-handedness is just a polite word for leaving. Pick your person, especially when it is hard, especially when the other side is comfortable. Pick your person and go and stand beside them. The second, if you are carrying a long estrangement, and your whole understanding of it is a story about how the other person wronged you, I would ask you, gently, to hold that story up to the light and check it for the things you left out. I left out everything that mattered. For 8 years, my story was true in every detail and false in its entire shape, because it was built around the one question I had never let myself ask. The story you tell about why someone left you is the easiest story in the world to get wrong, because you are the one writing it, and you are not a reliable narrator about your own worst moment. Go and ask them, while you still can. You may find, as I did, that the door has been open the whole time, the width of a hand, just waiting for you to stop talking and walk through it. In the worst season of someone's life, your opinion is worth almost nothing, and your presence is worth almost everything. So give them the presence and keep the opinion to yourself. I'll see you next time.